The morning of my daughter's engagement party, I was in the garage reorganizing shelves I'd already reorganized twice that week. That's what I do when something feels off. I move things around. I convince myself I'm being productive. My daughter Nora had called me 3 weeks earlier, breathless, excited in that way she gets where she forgets to breathe between sentences. "Dad, I need you to meet someone. His name is Cody. I know it's fast, but Dad, I know. I just know." I'd heard that before, not from her, but from myself. 32 years ago, standing in a phone booth outside a diner in Columbus, calling my own father. So I didn't say what my instincts told me to say. I said, "Bring him to Sunday dinner." Cody showed up 20 minutes late to that Sunday dinner. He walked in like he was doing us a favor. Firm handshake, good teeth, the kind of smile that lands just slightly wider than it should. He worked in commercial real estate, he said. Did well for himself, he said. He said a lot of things that first evening, most of them about himself. What he didn't do, not once, was ask me anything about my daughter, what she loved, what made her laugh, what she was afraid of. He asked me what neighborhood I lived in. He asked me if I'd owned my house long. He asked, very casually, the way you ask about the weather, whether the house was just mine or whether there was still a mortgage on it. I answered. I kept my face neutral, but I filed it away. Nora was glowing. She sat next to him at the table and kept touching his arm, the way people do when they're still amazed that something is real. She'd been through a hard few years, a bad breakup at 30, a job she'd outgrown, the kind of slow drift that happens to good people when life doesn't cooperate. She deserved to be happy. I wanted her to be happy. I just wasn't sure Cody was the one delivering it. I told myself I was being overprotective, old, suspicious for no reason. I almost believed it. The engagement party was at a venue Cody had picked, a rooftop space downtown that cost more per hour than I made in a day back when I was still running my electrical contracting business. I'd retired 4 years earlier, sold the company for a number I still don't say out loud to most people. The money sat in accounts. I lived simply. I drove a 9-year-old truck. I didn't talk about it. Somehow, within 6 weeks of meeting Nora, Cody knew about it. I still don't know exactly how. Maybe she told him. She'd had no reason not to. She didn't know yet that it mattered. The first real warning came on a Tuesday. Nora had left her phone on my kitchen counter during a weekend visit. It buzzed. I didn't look, but when she picked it up, her face changed for just a second before she composed it back to normal. She was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. We watched a Reds game and ate the chili I'd made and pretended the afternoon was normal. A week later, she called me and asked if I was thinking about updating my will since I was getting older, and that Cody thought it would be a good idea for the family to have a conversation about estate planning. She said it like she was embarrassed to say it, because she was. Cody thought, I repeated. He's practical, Dad. He just wants everything to be clear. We can talk about it, I said. Sure. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I'm not a paranoid man. 38 years in business, you develop instincts. You learn the difference between someone who's cautious and someone who's calculating. The cadence is different. Cautious people ask questions and then listen. Calculating people ask questions and then move. Everything about Cody moved. I called a friend of mine, a woman named Diane who used to handle HR investigations for a hospital system before she retired. We'd stayed in touch over the years, the way you do with people whose minds you respect. I didn't want to hire a detective. It felt dramatic. I asked Diane if she knew anyone discreet who could do a basic background search. She said she'd handle it herself, as a favor. She didn't even ask why. What she found took her 4 days. Cody had a previous marriage, not a divorce, an annulment, quiet and quick, from 7 years ago. The woman he'd been married to had filed a civil suit against him for fraudulent misrepresentation. The suit was settled out of court. The terms were sealed. There was also a business partnership that had dissolved badly, a former partner who had filed and then withdrawn a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission. And there was a lien on Cody's condo from a contractor he hadn't paid. None of it was criminal. All of it was a pattern. I didn't say anything to Nora yet. I needed to be sure I wasn't just a father looking for reasons. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I got my chance 6 weeks before the wedding. Cody called me directly, not through Nora, directly, and asked if we could have lunch. Just the two of us. Man to man, he said. He chose the place, a steakhouse I'd been to once for a client dinner 15 years ago. Nice place, the kind of nice where the menus don't have prices. He was already seated when I got there. Ordered a drink before I sat down. He was relaxed in a way that felt rehearsed. We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing, sports, the neighborhood, a construction project going up near my house. Then he leaned back and looked at me the way someone looks at you when they're about to say the thing they came to say. "I want to talk to you about the wedding gift," he said. I waited. "Nora and I have been looking at houses," he said. "There's a place in Anderson Township, nice neighborhood, good schools eventually." He smiled. "I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we found something we love. The thing is, the timing's tricky. My capital's tied up in a deal right now, and Nora doesn't have the down payment, and the seller won't wait." He slid his phone across the table. A real estate listing, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement. The asking price was $490,000. "I'm not asking for all of it," he said. "Just the down payment, $96,000, as a gift, for the wedding." I looked at the listing. I looked at him. "That's a significant gift," I said. "You can afford it," he said. Just like that, flat. Matter of fact, not rude exactly, but not asking either. I picked up the phone, looked at the listing one more time, set it back down. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded. Then he said the thing that I've turned over in my mind 100 times since. He said, "I'd hate for any misunderstandings to come up right before the wedding. Nora's been through a lot. She doesn't need more stress." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I drove home and sat in the garage again. I didn't reorganize anything. I just sat. There are moments where you have a choice between the peaceful version of things and the true version, and you have to decide which one you can live with. I'd made that choice before in business. I'd let people go when I knew they were stealing because the timing was bad and I didn't want the disruption. I'd regretted it every time. The disruption always came anyway, just later and worse. I wasn't going to make that mistake with my daughter's life. I called Diane. I told her what Cody had said at lunch. I asked her if she could find the woman from the annulment. She said she'd try. It took her 11 days. The woman's name was Beth. She lived in Dayton. She agreed to a phone call but not a meeting, and only after Diane explained who I was and why I was calling. Beth talked for 40 minutes. She and Cody had met when she'd just inherited money from her father. He'd moved fast, 3 months from first date to engagement. He'd been charming, certain, the kind of man who made decisions feel easy. He'd asked her to invest in a real estate development project. She'd put in $60,000. The project had dissolved. The money was gone. When she'd tried to ask questions, he threatened to tell her family she'd been having an emotional breakdown, that she was unstable, that she'd misremember things. She'd taken the annulment to make him go away. She hadn't told many people because she was ashamed. She asked me if I would warn my daughter. I told her I was going to do more than that. The wedding was at a vineyard outside Cincinnati. A beautiful place with a stone barn and rows of vines that had gone deep gold in the late October light. 112 guests. Nora had spent 8 months planning it. Her dress was her grandmother's, altered to fit her, and she'd cried when she first put it on and saw herself in the mirror. I had thought carefully about what I was going to do. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to humiliate anyone gratuitously. I was going to tell the truth, clearly and calmly, at the moment where it would matter most and where Nora would still have a real choice. I'd spoken to our family attorney 2 weeks before the wedding. I documented everything, the lunch conversation, the implicit threat, the information from Diane, the phone call with Beth. I had it all printed and organized in a folder that I kept in the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I asked the venue coordinator if I could have access to the microphone during the toast portion of the reception. She said yes, family of the bride, of course. I'd also told 2 people what I was planning. My sister, who sat next to me and held my hand during the ceremony, and Nora's best friend since college, a woman named Tracy who had privately told me 2 weeks earlier that she didn't trust Cody and hadn't since the beginning. Tracy had told Nora. Nora hadn't listened, but Tracy was there, seated in the front row, and she knew what was coming. The ceremony was beautiful. I won't say it wasn't. Nora was radiant. She'd worked so hard to find someone to build a life with, and she believed she'd found him, and that belief made her face open up in a way I hadn't seen since she was small. It was the hardest moment of my life, watching her walk toward him, knowing what I knew. The reception began, cocktail hour, then dinner, then the toasts. I let Cody's best man go first, short speech, a few jokes, then I stood up. I took the microphone. I looked at Nora first, sitting at the head table, happy, flushed, champagne in hand. I love her more than I've ever loved anything, and I held on to that feeling when I started to speak. Nora, I said, when your mother and I brought you home from the hospital, she made me promise 2 things. That I'd always be honest with you, even when it was hard, and that I'd never let anyone hurt you if I could help it. I paused. I intend to keep both of those promises tonight. The room went quiet in that particular way where you can feel people recalibrate. I said, 6 weeks ago, Cody asked me to lunch. He told me his money was tied up in a deal. He asked me for $96,000 for a down payment on a house, and then he suggested that it would be unfortunate if misunderstandings were to arise right before the wedding. Cody's chair scraped back. I kept going. I told them about the background check, the annulment, the civil suit, the lien, the business complaint. I told them about Beth and what had happened to her and what she had said to me on the phone. I didn't editorialize. I didn't call him names. I just described what I had found and what I had witnessed in the same voice I used for 38 years when I presented job estimates to clients. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and set the folder on the table in front of Nora. I printed everything, I said. It's all there. I'm sorry to do this here. I genuinely am. But there is no version of this that doesn't hurt, and I decided that today, before anything is signed, before anything is final, was better than next year or the year after. I set the microphone down. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Cody stood up and said my name in a voice meant to sound controlled, and Nora picked up the folder with shaking hands, and Tracy moved to sit beside her, and people started murmuring, and the vineyard coordinator was suddenly appearing from somewhere with a quiet, competent expression on her face. Cody spoke loudly. He said the lawsuit was baseless, the annulment was mutual, the lien was a clerical issue. He said Beth was unstable. He said I had always hated him and had manufactured a reason to destroy his relationship with my daughter. I didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. Nora read the first 2 pages of the folder. Then she set it down and looked at Cody for a long time. She said very quietly, "Did you threaten my father?" He said it wasn't a threat. It was a comment. She said, "Did you ask him for $96,000? He said he had mentioned the house as a possibility." She said, "Without telling me?" He started to explain. She stopped him. I won't share what she said next because it was between them and it wasn't mine to keep. But I'll tell you that she took off the engagement ring and set it on the table between them, and that she walked out of the reception hall with Tracy, and that she held herself together until they got outside, and then she didn't. I found her 20 minutes later sitting on a stone wall near the parking lot, shoes off, the hem of her grandmother's dress folded over her knees. She'd been crying, but she'd stopped. She looked at me for a moment. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I had suspicions before the engagement party," I said. "I had real information about 6 weeks ago." "Why didn't you tell me then?" I sat down next to her. The October air was cold and still, because if I'd told you 6 weeks ago, there's a chance you'd have been angry with me and defended him. I needed you to hear it in a room where walking out was easier than explaining yourself to 100 people who love you. She was quiet for a moment. "That's a little manipulative, Dad." "Yes," I said, "it is." She almost laughed. Almost. The folder was a nice touch. "I run a tight meeting." She leaned into my shoulder the way she used to when she was 12 and something at school had gone wrong. We sat there until the parking lot lights came on. Cody had left before that. His best man helped him load the gifts, none of which were opened, into an SUV, and they drove away while the guests still milled around inside, not sure whether to eat the dinner that had been paid for or leave. I went back inside and told the catering staff to serve the food. I thanked the venue, I sat with my sister and a few of Nora's friends, and we ate and we talked quietly, and nobody pretended it hadn't happened, which felt more honest than any other way to handle it. In the weeks after, it got hard in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Nora went through a grief that was real, even if what she was grieving wasn't real. She loved a version of Cody that she had constructed from what he'd let her see. That version was worth mourning. She knew that. She let herself mourn it, and then she stopped. She also went to therapy. Her idea, not mine. She said she wanted to understand how she'd missed the signs. I told her that missing the signs didn't mean she was foolish. It meant she was trusting. Those are not the same thing. We talk about it now sometimes, usually on Sunday evenings when she comes for dinner and we end up at the kitchen table longer than either of us planned. She's doing well. She got a promotion in the spring. She signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in the neighborhood she'd always wanted to live in. She told me recently that she started dating someone. He's a middle school science teacher. He's been doing it for 11 years because, she said, he can't imagine doing anything else. She brought him for Sunday dinner last month. He showed up 10 minutes early. He helped clear the table without being asked. When I mentioned I'd spent 38 years in the electrical business, he asked me what the most interesting job I'd ever done was, and he listened to the whole answer. I don't know where it will go. I'm not going to predict it, but I'll tell you that when they left that evening and I was standing at the door, I didn't feel the need to go reorganize anything. Some things feel right from the beginning, even when you've learned to be careful about that feeling. You get quiet and you listen, and sometimes what you hear is worth believing. I'm 63 years old. I've made mistakes I can't take back, but I've also learned that love without honesty isn't protection, it's just delay, and Nora deserved better than delay. She knows that now. So do I. I still think about that stone wall outside the vineyard sometimes, the parking lot lights flickering on, Nora's shoes sitting beside her on the ground, the hem of her grandmother's dress folded over her knees. That image stayed with me longer than anything else from that day. Not the ceremony, not the guests, not the moment Cody's chair scraped back, just my daughter sitting on that wall, barefoot, trying to hold herself together. There's a cause and effect to everything, even when we don't see it clearly while it's happening. Cody didn't become the man he was at that lunch table overnight. Every time he walked away clean, from Beth, from the business partner, from the contractor he'd left unpaid, it confirmed something in him, that it worked. that people would rather absorb the loss than make the scene. He built a system on the assumption that love makes people look away, and for a long time it had. What he didn't account for was that the same love he was counting on to silence me was the exact thing that made silence impossible. I'd think about the choices I made in those weeks. Running the background check, calling Diane, finding Beth, waiting until the wedding rather than confronting him privately. None of those were easy decisions, and I've asked myself more than once whether I did it the right way. Nora called it a little manipulative, sitting on that wall. She wasn't wrong. I made a calculated choice about timing and setting, and I'd make it again, but I don't pretend it was clean. What I do know is that the truth itself was never in question. Not once I had the folder in my hands. And I think there's something important in that distinction between knowing the truth and having the nerve to say it out loud in a room full of people who came expecting a celebration. That took something I'd spent a long time building. Not courage in the dramatic sense, more like the quiet refusal to let comfort win when it shouldn't. Nora went to therapy. She didn't do it because I suggested it. She did it because she wanted to understand her own pattern, her own blind spots. That took more honesty than anything I did. It's one thing to see clearly when you're on the outside of a situation. It's another to sit down with someone and ask hard questions about yourself, about why you wanted so badly to believe. That kind of clear-eyed self-examination is rarer than people think. I was proud of her for it. And then there was the science teacher who showed up 10 minutes early and asked what the most interesting job I'd ever done was, and listened to the whole answer. Small thing, tells you everything. I'm 63. I've learned that most of the damage in people's lives doesn't come from obvious villains. It comes from the slow accumulation of looking the other way. In business, in family, in yourself. Every time you let something slide because the timing's bad or the confrontation feels too costly, you're making a deposit into a debt you'll eventually have to pay anyway, usually with interest. What I hope Nora carries forward isn't suspicion. It's the three things I watched her build this past year without anyone telling her to. The honesty to see people clearly, the judgment to trust what she sees, and the steadiness to act on it, even when it costs her something. Those aren't things I gave her at the vineyard. I just tried not to let her lose them. The folder is still in my desk drawer. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it reminds me that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same thing, and that the gap between them is exactly where a person's character lives.